So my theme for this evening is titled Still Circling. So tonight what we will do is take a deeper dive into where are we still circling with our giants? Can we face our giants? We also want to look at what does, just like Padre Paul just said a moment ago, what gets in the way of us circling, or what gets in the way of us entering into the narrow gate, or at least coming up to the narrow gate. So tonight we are going to enter into the desert of the Old Testament, and we're going to enter into the desert of the New Testament as our way in to look at what gets in the way of us entering into the narrow gate or the promised land. So tonight we begin our journey into the Old Testament, and we reflect upon the journey of the Hebrew people when they were freed from slavery in Egypt, and they made their way towards freedom, towards the promised land. And this is a land that their journey had so many twists and turns, so many roadblocks, dead ends. They found themselves having to bump up against many things and had to detour around or had to go around. All the while, God is protecting his people that had just been freed. And as I was reflecting on our talk for this evening about still circling, I was thinking about, first of all, that they had left this land where they had been enslaved for many generations, and they were entering into a freedom. And I was thinking how they probably did not know what this freedom would look like. They didn't know what the promised land, what they saw before them was the vastness, this desert, the rocks, this lifeless ground. And here they were promised freedom. And so as I was reflecting on this, I also was reminded that oftentimes as they were traveling, they could not see in this vastness of the desert, they could not see the hand of God in every step of the way. And often as they were traveling, as I was reading and rereading the story of their travels, oftentimes they were hungry, they were thirsty, they had lost their way. Some of them thought that they were lost. And oftentimes they would say to Moses in Exodus, they would say to Moses and Aaron, why did we leave Egypt? Why did you bring us here into this desert? And so they themselves had lost kind of what was that freedom that they were looking for? What was this promised land? And they were starting to lose sight of what their freedom was. They couldn't believe in the promise that God was there for them, that God was with them every step of the way, because this was a journey that came with following the will of God, as well as following the path that God had laid out for them. And as I was thinking about this, how they oftentimes wanted to go back to what once was. They wanted to go back to Egypt, where at least they had food, they had shelter. It was a very predictable, it was safe, it was comfortable. And I was reflecting on how that is a time that we're in right now with the virus, with the pandemic, where things are uncertain. Things are no longer familiar. And how often have we heard friends or family talk about wanting to go back to the desert, or wanting to go back to what was safe, what was familiar. And I think that's been a huge part of what we're seeing or what we're experiencing right now. Like the Israelites, we too want to go back to what once was. So we too have lost what is familiar, and we're entering into this time of transition, much like the Israelites did. So God was there for them in this desert, in this journey. And I was thinking about this in terms of this what you have before you, this is God's work site. Whether we enter into this wilderness, we physically go there and enter into it, or we enter into our heart space. We enter into that inner desert, knowing that this is God's workspace. This is the space that God chooses to teach us about surrendering and to teach us about the mystery, entering into the unknown. And for this, we are grateful. All of us, at some time in our life, will embark on this journey to go into the desert, to go into and hear the whisper, to hear the voice of God. We all must enter at one time in our life. And some of us on this call have already entered the desert, or maybe you're on this call and you're being called to go within, to go into this desert. But at some point, we are all called to go within. And like the Israelites, we may find ourselves bumping up against detours, distractions, roadblocks, but we all must continue on this journey inward. And in that moment, I had to surrender that my life was going to be reordered. It was no longer my will, but it was God's will. And each of us, as we enter into the desert, that is the ultimate question. Can I surrender to God's will versus mine?